Hello everybody, I'm Don Counts and welcome to Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6. Today we've got our friend Marie Caldwell here with us, and Marie's going to be talking about an interview she did with George Goober Lindsey. And we're going to show that here in just a little bit, as recently Marie worked in this business for a long time, and years ago you worked for the company Triangle.
Sure did.
And Triangle was a cable company in Fayetteville, and they had local access programming just like you see here on Fayetteville Public Utilities. And back in those days you had the opportunity to meet George Lindsey.
I did. Actually, Jeff Sargent, who I worked with at Triangle, we had a program called, I believe we called it Traveling with Triangle, where we went out and did some of the things like that you do now. And I had heard where Goober, I'm going to call him Goober because George Lindsey, I know that's his real name, but everybody knows him as Goober because we all grew up with Andy Griffith's show. It was my all-time favorite show. I absolutely loved it, loved all the characters. And so when I found out that Goober was going to be in Florence, I talked Jeff into going down there. I worked with Goober's agent at that time, and I don't even remember how I found out who that was. But anyway, Jeff and I went to Florence, and Goober was down there signing his book, Goober in a Nutshell. And so we did an interview with him. And I wished afterward that I had been able to read the book all the way through before I got down there, to know what questions to ask him, because it seemed to me that when I was talking to him, he really did not want to talk about the Andy Griffith show. But after reading the book, I really think that the reason he didn't want to talk about being Goober was because in my mind, and this is just me talking from reading his life story, I believe that it was too close to his actual self. I believe it was, Goober wanted to be a serious actor. He wanted to be in Hollywood. He wanted to hobnob with all the big guys, and he just never made it. And I think the thing that made him famous was being Goober. And you know, he was born in Jasper, Alabama, and he came from the wrong side of the tracks. And this is the things that he has said. His parents fought all the time. His mother drank a lot. Eventually they got divorced, and Goober said that his mother would go off on the weekends and they never knew who she was going to be married to when she came back home. So he had a really hard family life. He was about 2 pounds when he was born, and his mother was, she had this bone problem, and so she had a limp, and evidently something happened with the pregnancy or the delivery of the baby, so she had to stay a little bit longer. And Goober had an Aunt Ethel that brought him home. And so his life started out rough because on the way home they had a car accident. And his Aunt Ethel, he said she forever told him this. She never let him forget it. She covered his body with hers, and because of that he was okay, but she had this big huge blue scar on one of her knees for the rest of her life because she protected him. So she was constantly reminding Goober that he wouldn't be there if it weren't for her. So this was something he just had to deal with as a child. And I made some notes here because I didn't want to forget. He told so many funny stories in his book. And some of the highlights I wanted to bring out. One thing I wanted to tell is that Ernest Borgnine, who is a well-known actor, he has also just passed away just recently. He wrote the foreword for Goober in his book, Goober in a Nutshell. And Ernest Borgnine credits Goober with saving his life. He said that he was at the lowest point of his life. He was ready to commit suicide. And he had some things to do that day when he was thinking about committing suicide. And he took his car to a service station to have it serviced. And he walked across the street to a restaurant. And in the restaurant was a friend of his. And so he sat down with him and they were talking. And the friend says, "Do you know George Lindsey?" And he said, "No, I've never heard of him." And he said, "Well, he's on the Andy Griffith show." He said, "Well, that didn't mean anything to me." But George came in and sat down. And of course, they all had coffee and they were talking. Well, the friend had to leave and left Ernest there with George. And they talked for 8 hours. And they talked about everything from golfing to farming, just whatever came into their minds, they talked. And he said that George was one of the funniest people he had ever met. He said when he left that day, George had saved his life. The thought of committing suicide had left his mind. He had just basically, I guess you could say, just fallen in love with George Lindsey.
Wow.
Because of his humor,
Sure.
and the things they talked about. So he wrote the foreword for Goober in the book, and I thought that was interesting because when you look at Ernest Borgnine and then you look at Goober, you're like, you know, I just don't get this connection.
Mm-hmm.
But he credited George with saving his life, and the rest of his life they were friends.
Wow.
Which I thought was really neat.
And Ernest just died recently.
Recently,
at 95 years old, so lived a long life.
So we just, you know, Andy died just recently.
Yeah, Andy Griffith died within the last few weeks here when we were recording this show, and I'm sure people will watch it for quite some time. So they've lost a lot of big name actors in the last few years.
Yeah, but let me tell you just a few more things about George's early life.
Okay.
Now his parents, like I said, they did not get along at all. They fought. He said a lot of times they would run through the house with knives chasing each other.
Wow.
Now he was an only child, and he was also the only grandchild or grandson on either side of the family. So of course he got a lot of attention. He had his mother had 4 sisters, and her family also were really wealthy. And so Goober would go over to his grandparents' house a lot of times. They basically raised him. They lived across town, but they had this big, huge house. They had servant quarters, horse barns, fish ponds. I mean, they had it all. It was on like 5 acres, but it was in the middle of town.
In Jasper?
In Jasper, Alabama, which is where Goober grew up. And his daddy just couldn't keep a job. So of course they were like on welfare, or I think it was called relief back then. And he would say that a lot of times there was no food in the house, and he would be looking for food. You know, there was nothing there. He'd come in from school, they weren't there. There was no food in the house. He would walk across town to his grandparents' house to get food. And he said he remembered one time that he was going across to his grandparents' house. There was no food in the house, and he passed the jail, and his parents' car was sitting in front of the jail. And he said he found out later that they were both in jail for drunkenness and fighting. And he said this is where I think he had to make jokes to even get through his life. He said it was kind of hard when somebody asked you, are your parents coming to the PTA meeting? He would have to say, well, when they get out of jail, maybe they'll be there. And so he was always embarrassed. He was always humiliated by his parents. But his grandparents were very good to him, and he knew he could always get a meal at their house. And he talks about his Christmases and how they never had a Christmas. He never had a Christmas. Wow. But when he went to his grandparents' house, they always had a lot of food, and there was always presents under the Christmas tree. He remembered one Christmas where there was no food in the house, there were no presents, there was no tree. And I suppose it was some sort of an organization that kind of like that we have here locally that know about families, and they take food. And he said these people came up on the porch with a box of food and left it on his porch, and his daddy was so angry that he cussed them out and run them off. And he said he didn't know what his daddy was mad about. He was mad at them, and he seemed to be mad at him and his mother. And his daddy went off in the woods and cut a tree and drug it in, and then went outside, and this is so horrible. He went outside and he just scooped up like where the cows had been, like, and took that in the house and put it on the Christmas tree. And George said that was the awfulest Christmas. He would never forget his daddy doing that, and he still didn't know why his daddy did it because it was so awful. And he said lots of times he would not get a Christmas present. But when you went back to school, and we all remember this, the teacher would say, well, how was your Christmas? What did you get for Christmas? And he said a lot of times he'd make things up. But he knew that everybody in the class knew that he didn't really get anything. And one year his dad did whittle him a gun and out of wood, and George said he was so embarrassed when he opened it up that he took it outside and threw it away. And he said that was the only gift ever he really remembered getting for Christmas. Wow. So he really did have, you know, some hard times when he was growing up, and I guess that might have, you know, kind of molded him into the person that he became.
Sure.
They didn't have electricity in the house. They didn't have water. Now the grandparents did. So, you know, when he looked at his life with his parents, and then over on the other side of town, the grandparents had everything. So of course he wanted to spend as much time with them as he could. His Aunt Ethel owned a garage, and after her husband died, she ran the garage, and Goober said she knew more about a car than any man he ever knew. That she could do anything on a car, work on a car. He had an Aunt Gladys that owned a mattress factory, and an Aunt Agnes that married a man who became a project superintendent at Oak Ridge, and then Aunt Lucille, who was an old maid school teacher. And his mother just seemed to be, it was her family, but she just couldn't seem to get her life together. And he said that, like I said, that they divorced when he was in the 8th grade, and after that he didn't see much of his father at all. But he said he was, you know, embarrassed by his parents and the life that he had all of his life. It was like he had this chip on his shoulder from his childhood that he just couldn't get rid of. And he told this funny story about his granddaddy bought a 1937 Packard touring car, and right off the bat he had a wreck, and he knocked the fender off the car. Well, instead of taking it over to Aunt Ethel to get it fixed, he just took a piece of corrugated tin and fastened it onto his car for his fender. But he said you'd see his granddaddy coming down the middle of town. He might have a calf in the back of the car, he might be pulling a wagon, and he never stopped at any stop signs, he never stopped at any red lights. The road was his, and said everybody in town knew to look out for his granddaddy when they saw him coming down the road, because the road was his.
Wow.
And Goober, he wasn't a good student in school either. He just couldn't seem to catch on to, you know, the subjects. He just really didn't care about school. And he laughed, and he said the only thing he could do was dance and tell jokes, and he would do anything to make people laugh, because for attention. He wanted everybody's attention. And so he said he was the best dancer in school, that the girls would dance with him, but nobody would date him. But he did have a date one time, and they went to a dance. And George, he had this navy suit, but his shoes were brown suede. So he figured out if he put water on his shoes, it made them look black. So before he got ready to go pick the girl up, he wet his shoes. He said he watered his shoes. He went to the dance, and of course he was dancing, and he said he looked down and his shoes was beginning to turn brown, so he rushed to the bathroom, he watered them again, and did this 2 or 3 times till the end of the dance. So he had black shoes, but they were watered black shoes. But he said afterwards maybe he should have watered his suit too, because he never got another date with a girl. Which I thought that was kind of funny that that he did that. He was enrolled in a military school, which his grandparents paid for. After high school, he went into a military school, and I don't think they ever let him forget that they paid $900 for him to go to the military school. And when he came home for Christmas, they made him put his uniform on, and they drove him all around town so everybody could see what their $900 had bought. So they made they had a little parade with George, you know, as the star. And he did enroll in Florence State Teachers College in North Alabama, which is now the University of North Alabama. But after the summer classes ended, he didn't have enough money to enroll, and his Aunt Ethel wouldn't give him any more money. So George decided the only way to get back to school was win a football scholarship. And he said he had to go to college, and he had to be a movie star. That was his 2 goals. Well, he probably accomplished one of them, but he didn't accomplish, you know, both of them.
Yeah.
But another thing, you know, of course, I know people know him as Goober in the Andy Griffith Show, but he actually had a lot of movies and was in a lot of movies. He didn't have big parts, but he was in a lot of movies before he actually got into the Andy Griffith Show. Do you? I'm just talking and talking, but I know if you want to ask me some questions, you know, just.
I knew he was in some movies, but then when he got to become Goober, he was really what we consider typecasted, and so he was Goober from now on, and Goober till he died. And I'm sure some people don't feel good about that.
Well, I think he didn't. He said that it always made him feel good though if he was in his, you know, his old Mayberry outfit, if he was out in public and somebody would say, "Hey Goober," you know, it was nice, but he really didn't like that. That's who they always thought he was Goober. That there was not another person other than Goober. And he said that that I know you've got some questions for me, don't you?
I do, and mainly was talking about the the Andy Griffith Show and the recent passing of Andy Griffith, and many people have favorite episodes, but what was probably one of the ones that episode
that one of Goober's favorites.
Yeah.
Goober's favorite episode was the one. It was called, I think it was called "The Man and His Dog." It's where Opie and his friend put a walkie-talkie under the collar of the dog, and then Goober thought the dog was talking to him, and he just knew he'd struck it rich, you know.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people will remember that episode.
I remember that one.
It was farther along in the series. Goober was on there for 8 years.
Really?
But this was one of his favorites, except he said that the dog didn't like him. He said they were shooting one day, and he was down talking to the dog, and in the middle of the shooting, the dog just bites him in the face. And he said he guessed nobody told the dog what the name of the episode was "The Man and His Dog," but he said he hated that dog, but that was his favorite episode, was the one with the dog.
I like that too.
And his favorite episode with Barney, which he absolutely adored Barney, was the one where it was called Goober Gets a Date, I think, and Barney drags him up on the front porch of Helen's house, and they're looking in the window, and there's Andy and Helen on the couch watching TV, and Andy's this smooth move, puts his arm around back of Helen's shoulders, and Goober gets all excited and starts hollering, and he said that working with Barney was just amazing, because you only did one take with Barney. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he made it so easy, and it made you look good.
Wow.
So he loved working with Barney, but he said after they would finish filming, a lot of times they would stay around and talk or whatever. Never Barney. Barney always went straight home. He never had a lot to do with the other people on the show.
Interesting. That's interesting. Well, that is a very good episode, and looking back at that show, it was the part of America, and even today, it's what we would hope our hometown would be like, even back in those days. And that's just a great show, and it's really great you got to meet him. One thing too that we've always heard, and it's on my list here, and it's going to be a little out of order, but we've always heard he had some dealings in Hazel Green. You might talk a little bit about that.
He did. He had applied for a job. I think it may have been in Birmingham, a teacher's job, and it was a coaching job. And they didn't offer him the coaching position, but as an assistant coach. And he thought, well, he knew a little bit more than being an assistant, so he turned him down. Then he heard about the job in Hazel Green. So he applied for that job as a coach, and he got it. Well, he had already applied to an acting school in New York, so he knew he was only going to be in Hazel Green for a year. And he and his wife, he was married at that time, they moved to Huntsville, and they lived in an apartment in Huntsville, and he drove up to Hazel Green. Wow. But he said he never fit in the school because he was not from Hazel Green.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't live in Hazel Green, so he never really fit in. And one of the things that he also had to do was they made him, as a coach, the disciplinarian. So if somebody acted up, they had to go and see Goober, and so he had the paddle. And he said a lot of times he did just lay into them and give it to them good. But he said, depending on what the person had done, the student had done, a lot of times he would tell them, you just yell, and he'd hit himself in the leg with the paddle and let them act like they were getting the licks, because he just couldn't do it.
Wow.
But he said he never joked around with his students. He never had any kind of we've all had teachers that we really loved and we felt close to. He was not that kind of a teacher. He was so inexperienced, and he didn't want any kind of laughter or anything going on in his classroom. He said he was the only teacher at Hazel Green High School who did not get a Christmas card from a student. And that was something he never forgot. But but he knew it was his fault because he had no real relationship with his students.
Sure.
But he was only down there for, like I said, a year. But while he was there, his team, his football team, the A team, they won 12 and lost 12. But the B team that he had won like 24 and lost 1. So he had a lot of talent down there that he could deal with. But he really couldn't, I guess you could say he couldn't put his heart into it because he knew he was not going to be there long. And that's kind of a connection that we can all have with him because Hazel Green's so close.
Yeah, I've always heard he had some dealings at Hazel Green and actually lived down there, but I didn't realize he lived in Huntsville and done some teaching there. But one thing too, as I move on to my questions here, that most people know him as on the Andy Griffith Show, but also he's on Hee Haw, and we all know that that was always funny too.
It was, and actually, if you have FPU cable, you can watch Hee Haw on Sunday nights. I'm giving you a little plug here.
Thank you.
Hee Haw is on Sunday nights on channel 77 at 7 o'clock.
Wow.
And a lot of time you will see Goober, and he's in his Goober outfit, you know, on the show. And he loved Grandpa Jones and Archie Campbell. But when he first came on the show, they didn't like him. They didn't like him because he'd just come off of a TV series.
Sure, he was a star.
He was a
big
star. And a big star in Goober's mind more than anybody else's. But but you know, that's what kind of the way they looked at him too, was, you know, he's kind of interloper. But he said he would follow them all over the set. He listened to everything they had to say. He listened to their jokes, and he tried to kind of imitate them a little bit.
Wow.
But the funniest thing he said was Junior Samples, which, you know, we all remember Junior Samples. He said the producers would deliberately write things and words that he didn't understand because he said he wasn't educated. Junior was not educated. So they would love to put big words in what he had to say, so he would get all mixed up and they'd have to redo it. But he said when they started shooting the show, nobody knew what they were going to say. When they started to shoot, they would have cards with what you were supposed to say. So they would have to look over wherever the card was located, and that was their lines. And if you watch Hee Haw, a lot of times you'll see they left a lot of that in, which is funny now because it's bloopers. But for Junior, they loved doing it because he couldn't pronounce words, or he didn't know what they meant, and Goober kind of felt sorry for him because, you know, because they did that, but Junior didn't care. He you know, he loved it. But he did like doing Hee Haw, and he was on there for several seasons for Hee Haw. And the way he got on Hee Haw was one of the producers of Hee Haw had done some stuff with Goober in Hollywood, and so when they started the Hee Haw show, he ran into Goober and said, well, you should come and be on the show. Well, they wanted to make Goober a regular, but in Goober's mind, he was a star. And so he wanted to be like, you know, make appearances on the show. He didn't want to be a regular, so he just made appearances on the show.
Well, you know, that Hee Haw, it would be really interesting to go back and look at some of those, because as funny as it was then, I'm sure it's still funny today. And that was shot in Nashville, right?
It was.
Probably one of the best shows that's produced out of Nashville in a long time. And I believe that show was originally aired on Saturday night. Was that when it came on?
I think so.
Now you couldn't find anything but Channel 6 on Saturday.
I know, that's right. That's right, Channel 6.
Yeah.
Well, he told another funny story about Archie Campbell, and you might remember where Archie's the judge, and he's got the gavel, and he's like ordering the court, and Goober was standing up there and beside him, and instead of hitting the gavel on the desk, Archie hits Goober in the head, but he didn't realize that he was hitting him as hard as he did, and Goober said he just fell on the floor. It just like knocked him out, and he said he jumped up and started cussing out Archie Campbell. Said, what is wrong with you, you know? Of course, that part they cut out, but there, if you watch it, you may get the opportunity to see that where he actually hits George on the head and he falls down.
So they show some of the bloopers now.
They show a lot of the bloopers.
That's good. As we move on through my questions here, let's talk about Special Olympics. That's something that's near and dear to my heart. So what part did he play in that?
This was after, you know, Mayberry RFD was on after Mayberry, and Goober was a character they carried on over into Mayberry RFD. And so that show was kind of beginning to wind down, and he received a call from, let me get my notes here and I can tell you exactly who, the commissioner, you got me all confused here, Don.
I'm sorry.
The commissioner on physical fitness for the state of Alabama asked George to come to Sanford College and participate. They wanted him to be a water boy in the Alabama Special Olympics. So he puts his Goober outfit on, and he thought, well, you know, that's something he could do. But when he first got down there, he met Ethel Kennedy. And, you know, a lot of us may remember that Ethel Kennedy was very dedicated to the Special Olympics. And he was so impressed with her that he decided he was going to make that his fundraiser. He wanted to help him out. And while he was there, he had his Goober uniform on. He walked by the aquatic center, and there was a little 8-year-old girl that was in the water, and she seemed to be struggling and having a hard time with her swimming. And so, without thinking, he thinks that she's drowning. He jumps into the pool to save her. And as he gets close to her, she says, leave me alone. I'm okay, I'm just slow. And he said that hit him then that was what Special Olympics was all about. And it just made him that much more determined to get involved in it. So he started having golf tournaments to raise money for Special Olympics. Roy Clark would come down. A lot of Hollywood actors that he got to know came down, and they would perform and put on little shows, and they would raise money for Special Olympics. So it was not a connection, like a family connection or somebody in his family that needed the service. Just through going and seeing what they did and meeting Ethel Kennedy, he just got caught up in it. And so he did that for years. He raised money for Special Olympics. And a lot of people, they probably don't even know that because, it was in Alabama, of course, but but still, I mean, he wanted to give something back to the community. He wanted to do something good, so they would raise money year after year. I think something like 15 years they did this.
Very good. That's good. That's good to know he done some good.
He did.
And as I skipped around on my questions there, you can get back and tell me some more that you've got there about him.
Well, he said the reason he became an actor, he went to the movies and saw Gone with the Wind, and he knew at that point he wanted to be an actor. So he started, like I said, cutting up at school, anything to get attention. He loved attention. And he had been a fan of Andy Griffith's for years. He knew who he was, and Andy was actually on Broadway doing No Time for Sergeants. And Goober went and tried out to be the understudy, Andy's understudy for Will Stockdale. And they told him, they said, well, you're not tall enough and you're not big enough. Well, actually, Goober was taller than Andy, but you never really knew that. And he said, well, okay, you know, they never called him, so that was the end of that. And then William Morris Agency was representing Goober, and they called him one day and said, there's a new show starting up called The Andy Griffith Show, and we'd like for you to go try out for the Gomer part. So he went and he tried out, and the producers, they told him, you're perfect, you've got the Gomer part. Well, because they told him that he had the part and he knew when they were going to start shooting, he really couldn't take on any more jobs. Well, in the meantime, Andy went to a club, I don't know exactly what, I think the club was called the Horn in like San Francisco, and Jim Neighbors was performing there. Well, Andy sees Jim and he just thinks he's hilarious. So he offers Jim Neighbors the job. Well, then they have to tell Goober, we're sorry, but we've got somebody else to replace you. You know, you don't have the job after all. Well, of course, that made him mad. He was furious. He watched the first episode of Andy Griffith where Gomer was in it, and he got so mad that he jumped up and he kicked his TV and knocked the tube out and started screaming, that's my part, that's my part. And he said after he had his little fit, then he felt bad because he couldn't watch Ben Casey that night. So he didn't have a TV to watch Ben Casey that night.
That's what happens when you kick the TV.
That's right. But then he found out that the part of the Goober part came up. So he went and he tried out for that and he got it. But he said that everybody was absolutely scared to death of Andy Griffith. What Andy said went. Andy made all the decisions. He could change your lines. He could change the script. Whatever he wanted to do, he did it.
Wow.
They filmed on Monday nights. And he said, if Andy didn't like your performance, or he didn't like the episode, or didn't like whatever went on on Tuesday morning, it was just like you were in a freezer. He said, you got the cold shoulder, Andy didn't speak to you. And so he said every Tuesday morning he was an absolute nervous wreck when he went in to see if Andy liked his show or not, or his performance or not. And he said sometimes Andy didn't. He said Andy didn't like the first episode, which was called The Fun Girls. That's the first time you see Goober is in The Fun Girls. And he said Andy didn't like that episode. So he was just really down and out about that. But he went to Andy and he said, you know, tell me, what do you see Goober as a character? How can I flesh him out and make him more live and more believable? And so he said, Andy stopped and he thought for a minute. He said, well, Goober's the kind of guy that would go into a restaurant and say, hey, this is good salt. Well, when you think about it, you know, that's pretty dumb. That's pretty, you know, but that was kind of what he started then making his Goober character, was because of what Andy had told him.
Andy was the man, no question.
Andy was the man, and he respected him. He really did respect Andy.
Wow.
He was afraid of him, as was everybody else on the show. The lady that played Clara, he loved Clara. He said she gave him good neck rubs. So when they would be, you know, waiting to go on, she'd be giving Goober a neck rub. And he loved Floyd the barber. Everybody on the show loved Floyd the barber. And there was a story with Floyd where somebody he and his wife knew in another town had passed away, and they didn't have a suit for this guy to be buried in. So Floyd and his wife sent this wool striped suit up for the guy to be buried in. Well, somehow, Goober said he never could figure this out. The suit got back to Floyd. It was returned after the man was buried. and so, in an episode, Gomer needed a suit. So Floyd brought the suit out and said, well, I've got this suit, I'll donate it, you know, you can use it. And you might remember seeing Gomer. It was probably a little short in the pants, you know, and a short on the arms, but it was a striped wool suit. So he used it the whole time he was there, and then when Goober came on, then it became Goober's suit. So Goober used it. Every time he needed a suit, that was the suit that they used.
Wow.
And Goober said he didn't think that Floyd ever got paid for that suit, and he didn't know whatever happened to it because it finally just wore out, and the producers had another one made just like it for Goober to wear in later episodes.
Wow. That's interesting. I read where Floyd, in the latter shows, the probably maybe even in the RFD part, he was really sick, and they just set him in a chair the last few episodes.
He had a stroke.
Yeah, that's right.
And sometimes he couldn't talk. He couldn't get the words to come out.
Wow.
But Goober said that Floyd could just look at you and say something. He said he could just say it's raining outside. But the way he said it, you would just fall down on the floor laughing because he was so funny. So he loved Floyd. And we've talked about Don Knotts a little bit.
Sure.
And Aunt Bee, Aunt Bee's a whole different story, which kind of shatters your idea of Aunt Bee because you think she's so sweet and lovable.
The perfect aunt,
Yeah. Well, they were shooting an episode, and this was a Mayberry RFD episode, and they were at it was about a horse, and they were at a racetrack. And so Goober said he was always cutting up, and he had a little bit of a foul mouth. And so they had stopped the shooting, and so he was standing over with Aunt Bee and a couple of other characters, and they were just clowning around, and he was using some foul language. Aunt Bee just takes out her umbrella and comes over and just whacks him over the head with it. He said it bent the umbrella, said she really laid it on him, and she said, you will not talk like that around me. And boy, she said she just laid into him about using foul language. And he said, he just apologized, you know, and said, I didn't say anything. And some of the other characters came up to him later and said, she shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't have hit you. But he said, he figured, you know, maybe he deserved it. And he said, she was such a character. She had nothing to do with anybody on the show. She didn't associate with them outside the show. She was so private. He said she would go to Goodwill and buy Christmas cards, and she would mark through or erase people's names on the Christmas cards.
Wow.
And she would put her own name on it, and she'd send them out at Christmas.
Wow.
And he said she passed away in Siler City, North Carolina, which he thought was kind of odd since Siler City was always mentioned, you know, a lot of times in the Andy Griffith Show,
Sure.
and she was not from there. But that's where she went to retire, and he said he thought it was so sad that, you know, he had heard when she passed away that all she had was a house full of cats.
Wow.
And nobody from the Andy Griffith Show went to her funeral.
Wow.
But he said it was because she was so private, she didn't want to be friends with them when they all worked together, so they all felt like maybe she wouldn't have wanted them there
Sure.
for her funeral.
Sure.
So that nobody even went.
It's amazing how people really are. And one thing about as you meet George Lindsey and talk to him, you see the people that we see on TV all the time. They are real people, and I think that's very interesting. I think your interview was done in '95.
It was either 95 or 96.
It says on the tape
Yeah.
here. We're fixing to show here a little bit, and I think it was really interesting to see. You were actually, and I know you got a little poem to read, and we're going to get to that, but you were actually in a bookstore somewhere in Florence, and you can see people in the background shopping, and y'all were just in the middle of the bookstore talking. So I thought that was very interesting, and it's going to be neat to see on Channel 6.
He was, but you know, to meet Goober, he was not what, like you said, they were people. You know, I didn't see Goober as a man. I saw Goober as Goober. I just, you know, because we watched it so many years, and that's who you thought he was, but that was not who he was. And he, you know, he wanted to fit in. He wanted to be a big star so bad, and he just never made it. And he did have some, you know, he was had a little bit of fame, but it was all through Goober.
Sure.
And I think he really would have preferred that to be not what he was remembered for. But
it's interesting, the people who want to make the big time, and it's really not exactly what they're wanting. You know,
that's right.
You know.
That's right. But I'm going to do the poem. He wrote this poem.
Okay.
This will be kind of wind down our little talk here.
As we get ready for the interview here that you're going to see that you did back when Marie was at Triangle Cable, was here in town, and looking forward to that. But go ahead and do your poem.
Okay. But let me first, before I do the poem, let me say that the name of the poem is What Mayberry Means to Me, and he wrote the poem. He was opening for Mel Tillis, and he didn't have anything to kind of close his joking section out, his little act. So he went to a local deli, he sat down at a table, and he just wrote this poem. And so then he started using it as his closing act. And in his own words, he said, "I've done the best I could with what I have, and I'm pleased. And I have always said that what I'd like on my tombstone, if I get one, is, I'm glad I made you laugh, and I hope I have, and that's a wrap." So let me read the poem that he wrote, which is his idea about Mayberry, and then we'll go straight into the interview. And he said, and this is going to be hard because I can't do this, but he said when you were reading the poem, to hum the Andy Griffith theme song really slow, and it would make the poem, it would kind of, so if you want to hum the Andy Griffith theme song.
I don't know how that's going to mix out there for you, but.
Then I will, then I don't know, Chuck, can you get a picture of get this little bit of Goober here? Okay, and the name of the poem again is What Mayberry Means to Me.
Okay.
Mayberry is going to church on Sunday. Are you humming? I don't hear you humming. And then after church, going to the drugstore for a cherry Coke. It's sitting around the barber shop, reading the sports page, getting a shoe shine, and listening to Fred and Spooky tell their corny jokes. It's going to the wrestling matches on Saturday night, or maybe to the county line for a beer or two. It's sitting in your car on Main Street watching the people pass when there's nothing else to do. It's shelling corn and making quilts, and sometimes there's a remnant sale. It's getting a call in the middle of the night to get a good buddy out of jail. It's book satchels and cloakrooms and notes from mother when you're late to school. It's getting a basketball for Christmas and practicing the golden rule. It's getting one of those Parker pen and pencil sets for high school graduation. Or if you're a girl, it's always evening in Paris perfume. It's being scared to ask that special girl to dance at the senior prom that happens every June. Oh, it's trying to learn to smoke cigarettes and dip snuff and chew tobacco, and you get so sick you think you're going to die. It's trying to get somebody to show you how to make a Windsor knot in your daddy's brand new Sunday tie. It's everything and everybody, and when you talk about it, you get that very, very special itch. But the thing that I like about Mayberry most of all, it's made old Goober rich. And I guess it did. It maybe didn't bring him the fame that he wanted, but it did bring him a little bit of money. So I hope you enjoy the interview that we'll be showing here shortly. And I hope you keep watching the Andy Griffith Show, because that will be always my favorite show.
Marie Caldwell, and this is her interview with George Goober Lindsey.
Welcome to Traveling with Triangle. I'm your host, Marie Caldwell, and I'm really excited to be here in Florence, Alabama with someone who feel like I've known for years, Mr. George Lindsey.
The Goobster is here.
The Goobster is here.
The Goobster's here at Anderson Books, and I'm here for an autograph signing tonight of my new autobiography, Goober in a Nutshell, Avon Books.
Okay, which you showed us the book when we first came on. It can be bought for $10.
Mm-hmm.
They can come down tonight.
They could give me 15 if they wanted to, but it's just 10.
It's just 10, and you'll take the 10.
Well, I need a little something to get home on.
Well, do need to eat occasionally, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, because after all, what did you say? 3 hours is a long time to go without eating.
That's something that, that was in the Griffith Show, and that's a chapter of the Andy Griffith Rerun Watchers Club. 3 hours is a long time to go without eating, but I don't remember saying it. Well, I did so many of those shows. There's a lot of that stuff I don't remember, but I know that is a chapter.
But you've done a lot more besides be on the Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah, but after I became Goober, that was the end of that.
You will always remain Goober in most people's hearts and minds.
Yeah, and that's what the book's a lot about, is how my struggle with that. But I'm okay now. I really can say that I like Goober and I love Goober.
Okay.
That's why I'm in this stuff,
And you look very charming today.
Thank you. I just got through lecturing to a senior theater group at the University of North Alabama, and I wore this wardrobe. And I felt comfortable about it. A year ago, 2 years ago, you couldn't have forced me at gunpoint to wear this stuff, but I did, and I'm okay with it.
You've become reconciled to the fact that George Lindsey is Goober and will remain Goober, no matter what else George Lindsey does.
Well, let's not go that far, because look at Andy. He never could have been anything but Andy Taylor, but now he's Matlock. Ben Matlock.
Ben Matlock. That's true. That's true.
So it might be something come along in my life that I don't have to be Goober.
Well, can I ask you?
Hey, in fact, I was Goober in a production of the Nashville Opera's Der Fledermaus this past week, but I did play Goober. How that worked, I don't know, but it worked.
And this was something a little unusual for you, was it?
I think it's a little unusual for them. They don't know. I did that opera about 20 years ago in upstate New York.
So you're talented in ways that most people would not even realize.
Oh, I don't know. I know my craft, and I know how to do it, and I've worked in a lot of venues, and I've worked in motion pictures and television and the theater on Broadway. I've got a movie right now that's coming out in May with Ray Stevens called Get Serious. And it'll be out in May or June.
And in this movie, what kind of character do you play?
I play the potentate of the shrine of the Ali Baba Temple of the Shrine.
What's the location of the movie, or where does it take place?
We shot it in Nashville, but it's 10 of Ray's videos that they redid, and
oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'm in that part of it. And he's a dear friend too.
I guess that was a lot of fun to work with Ray Stevens.
It was. He produced it, and he's a fun producer, and plus the fact we've been pals for Well, I was on the Ray Stevens show up in Canada 25 years ago. He had a summer show, and I was a regular on it in Toronto.
Can I ask you maybe one question about the Andy Griffith Show?
You can ask me a lot of questions about it.
Well, I'd like to know maybe who was your favorite character on the show as far as...
Everybody in the show will tell you the same thing. Floyd the barber, Howard McNear, we all adored the man. He's the funniest man I ever worked with, and he just, I don't know, he just, everybody loved him.
Was he the same off-screen as on-screen?
Well, not really, you know. His personality was a lot like Floyd, but you know, we're doing somebody else's words, so you know, he didn't go around acting like Floyd all the time, you know. You know, but he was quite an accomplished actor. You see him in a lot of Elvis Presley movies as the travel agent and etc. And without question, everybody's favorite is Floyd the barber.
You had a favorite episode that you named in the book.
Yeah, Goober and the Talking Dog. Yeah, what it shows is the cruelty of children to adults. Our show's always had a moral in every show, and that was my favorite show.
Can I ask you, the dog, the talking dog, was he used in several episodes? This is just something curious I just thought of on the way down
He
here.
was used in a lot of movies. That was a trained acting Hollywood dog. Yeah, and he was used in different episodes of that. The dog couldn't act a lick, though.
Well, he didn't have a very much of a speaking part, did he?
A barking part.
Barking part. And I have to ask you, will you do your impression of Cary Grant?
Okay, let's go back and talk about that. That's the first show I ever did, 1964. Today I still get asked to do that. Now, I've spent many years in doing good theater, you know. I did Broadway. I studied voice and diction in New York for years, and my career's come down to doing 3 words: Judy, 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 you know. And I guess I'll do that too. I guess they'll put that on my tombstone.
Judy, Judy, Judy.
Yeah.
But it's because people love you so. It's because people don't see you.
Or do they love Cary Grant?
No, I think they love I think they love the way you did Judy, 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 your impersonation of Cary Grant. I think that's what they love. I think they love Goober, the character.
Do you think Cary Grant ever said that?
I don't remember maybe when he said it.
I don't think he did. Judy, Judy, Judy. That's it. Judy, Judy, Judy. It's not very hard.
That was good.
Can you do it? Let me hear you do it. Come on.
I can't
do it. Judy, Judy, Judy.
Judy, Judy, Judy.
No, it's got to be more. It's got to be Judy, Judy, Judy. A neighbor says, I can't do that. Judy, Judy, Judy. Oh, I can't do it. That's 2 Alabama boys playing Gomer and Goober. I was going to do a picture with Sidney Kingsley called Goober and Gandhi, but Kingsley wanted to wear the cap, and I wouldn't do it.
Well, no, that's
No,
Goober's
that's
cap.
my cap.
That's
He's
Goober's
not gonna
cap.
do that.
In your book, you tell how the cap, how you came up with the cap, your idea.
I
for the
didn't
cap.
come up with the cap. The writers come up with the cap. I just told how it physically was made in the book. The book is not only the Andy Griffith Show. It's Hee Haw.
Right.
It's Jasper, Alabama. It's Florence, Alabama. It's playing football in college. It's getting through life. It's going to New York. It's going to Hollywood. It tells about my marriage and how it fell apart. And a few years ago, it tells about I had a drinking problem. It tells about that, how I conquered that. It tells about my children. It tells about my friends.
It's an honest look at George Lindsey, from George Lindsey's perspective.
Yeah, it's honest, all right. I think the biggest criticism I've got in the book is people say I was too hard on myself, but I don't think so. It's a cleansing book too. It's also a book that tells that you can rise above a dysfunctional family.
Let's talk about Hee Haw just for a second.
All right.
There's
Hee ho ho ho.
bring back memories.
I just was with Grandpa this week.
Were you?
Mm-hmm.
There was in your book you mentioned one time when Grandpa was late for a
He hit me in
rehearsal
the
or-
stomach.
Yes.
He's got a temper. Well, we're dear friends. I just love him. I see him all the time, and we try to have lunch together once a week. And I went to see Minnie a couple of weeks ago, and she's not doing well, but she had her sense of humor.
Is she home?
No, she's in
still
a
in
nursing
nursing
home.
home?
And I went in, and then I said, "How you feeling?" She said, "You're not funny." I made some dear friends on that show.
Archie Campbell, you had a little run-in with his gavel in
Yeah,
one
hit me in the
episode.
head.
So
You have read the book.
I have read the book. You should read the book. You should go and buy the book, Goober in a Nutshell.
It's Avon Publishing.
Avon Publishing, $10.
It'd make a good gift. Will you tell Rick to call me?
I already have.
Okay.
Take care of it.
Thank you. We're just talking to the chief of police. He's going to come and see me, I hope. Fire away.
All right, let me ask you about your dance lessons. I know
can-
that you took like 50 hours when you were working with the Special Olympics on
I was
a
doing
program.
a show, and I had to come up with something new, so I decided to break dance. So I took the Thriller album and condensed it into about 3.5 minutes of moonwalking and doing.
Do you
all
want to
that.
give us a sample of
No,
moonwalking
not
right
in
now?
these clodhoppers. I got on the Goober shoes. I can't do that.
Well, I can't see Goober moonwalking. I have a problem
Well,
with that, so
You'll
we need to
just-
see George Lindsey doing that.
You'll just have to fake that. I did the waltz in the Fledermaus with the leading ballerina. I danced in that show. I can dance. I've taken dance and body movement for years and years and years, and I take tap dancing a lot when I'm not working. This is my hobby. In my next life, I'm coming back as a tap dancer.
As a tap dancer.
Yeah, I really like that. You know, we just lost one of our great dancers, which was Ginger Rogers. Yeah,
Yesterday, I think.
Yeah, 86 years old. What a wonderful talent.
Certainly was.
People can act and dance like Gene Kelly, and I admire. I'm like Donald O'Connor is my hero. He could do it all, you know, singing, dancing, the whole thing. And here I am in Florence, Alabama.
Here you are in Florence. Tell us about your participation in the Special Olympics. I know you have a place in your heart for the Special Olympics.
Well, I just sort of godfathered the Alabama Special Olympics. We raised, through my friends in show business, about $1,400,000 for them, and we funded, I think we were funding over 20,000 Special Olympians in the last year. I had a George Lindsey Celebrity Golf Tournament every year in Montgomery, Alabama, and all my friends came. We put on a show, and we raise money for the Special Olympics. And if you ever see one child throw a ball, or if you ever see, one child swim, or the whole thing is to get the child out of the classroom onto the playing field, and then at the end of whatever event they're in, there's a hugger there, no matter when they finish. So now I'm going to start with Special Olympics, the 19th and 20th in Nashville at Vanderbilt University. We're going to have the state games, and I'm involved.
Well, good. We have a group from Fayetteville that go up.
Great.
Special Olympics, so I know they'll be looking forward to seeing you.
I helped build a high school there.
In
I
Fayetteville,
believe I did.
maybe it was Lincoln County High School.
Yeah, we did a
Roy Clark.
and me.
And you were there.
We did the
Yes,
concert
yes,
to
you
help
did.
get money for that school. Yes.
Yes.
So see, I've got some kind of a connection there. I worked in that auditorium once.
We owe you a debt of thanks for
No,
that.
you don't. We just had a good time. Nobody owes me anything, you know.
Well, we don't want to give away all the secrets to Goober in a nutshell because we want everybody to buy the book.
Well, you can come to Florence and get it at Anderson's.
Get it at Anderson's. Now, is this book available in all bookstores, or is it only in the Books A Million affiliates, or can the book be bought anywhere?
I think it can be bought at other bookstores. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I think so. But I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Let's go back to Mayberry one more time. You wrote a poem, What Mayberry Means to Me.
4.
4. 4.
Yeah, but I know it's in my book.
It's
and
in
I
your
don't want
book.
to do it.
No,
It's the end of my book.
It's the end of your book.
Yeah.
But it has a punchline that I thought was really neat.
don't give that
the
away.
end. We won't give that away. They'll have to buy the book to read the poem and find out the punchline. But we won't take up too much of your time. I know you're down here to sign the book, and it looks like there's a crowd
I'm
gathering.
down here to see friends. I played football here with a guy that went on to make one of the greatest pro football players ever, and that was Harlan Hill. We played on the same team, and UNA, University of North Alabama, won for the second year in a row the National Division II Football Championship this year. And I was at the game, and we'll probably win it again next year.
Good.
And they give the Harlan Hill Trophy here for the best player in Division II football.
Well, actually, I cheated a little. I heard you on QLT this morning.
Oh,
I heard you talking about. So I knew about that. Well, what's coming up for George Lindsey? What are your plans for the future?
Oh gosh, I'm booked through September. I'm going to Montreal and work there Saturday. I'm doing a whole bunch of radio shows this week, and tomorrow I'm going to Franklin, Tennessee, and read to 3 5th grade classes of school children. I'm going to read the Swiss Family Robinson to them.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm sure the kids will love that.
Then I'm doing some other things this week, and then I work in Montreal. And then I come back, and I'm going down to the Kenny Staber Celebrity Golf Tournament in Point Clear, Alabama. I'm playing that, and then I'm working in St. Louis. And then I come back, and I go play in the Foster Brooks Golf Tournament in Louisville. And I'm taking some time off in May because I've been on the road with this book since the middle of March.
And you actually live in L.A.?
Well, yes and no. I'm living in Nashville right now, but I still have a house in Los Angeles, what's left of it. There's 4 seasons in Los Angeles. There's fire, rain, drought, and earthquake.
Well, mudslides. Maybe there's 5 out there.
But I liked it. I like living out there. I live in New York, there in Florida.
Well, is there any words of wisdom you want to pass on before we close out our program? Either from Goober or from George Lindsey?
Yeah. Whatever the situation, just remember, life is really good.
Thank you, George. This has been Marie Caldwell on Traveling with Triangle. Thank you for joining us. And remember, Goober says hey.
Hey.